Good morning, students. Today we are going to learn subject English. We will continue learning with chapter number 3.6, The Merchant of Venice. In the first part of the story, we have seen that it is the story about a young merchant named Antonio. Antonio lived in a prosperous city of Venice in Italy. He has invested almost all his money in the ships and he was waiting for the ships to return with merchandise. As Antonio was a kind man, he had many friends. But his best friend was Bassanio. Bassanio was young and handsome nobleman, but unfortunately he had no money. Bassanio wanted to marry Portia, who was the only daughter of a wealthy man. Portia lived far away from Venice in Belmont. Portia's father had died, leaving all his estate and property for Portia. In his will, before dying, Portia's father had already written about the test through which Portia's husband should be selected. All the suitors of Portia, or the men who wanted to marry Portia, had to choose between three different caskets which were made of gold, silver and lead. Each casket had something written on it. As soon as the news about the test spread around, many of the Portia's suitors came to appear for the test. One of the Portia's suitors was the Prince of Morocco, who chose the golden casket. But it was the wrong casket. Another suitor was the Prince of Aragon, who chose the silver casket. Even the silver casket was the wrong one. When Bassanio heard about this test, he wanted to try his luck with these caskets. But in order to appear for the test, Bassanio had to travel from Venice to Belmont, where Portia lived on her estate. Belmont was very far from Venice and thus large amount of money was needed for the travel. When Antonio came to know about his friend being in trouble due to money, he came forward to help his friend Bassanio. Antonio had already invested all his money in the ships which had not yet returned. Thus, he had no money with him. But in order to help his best friend, Antonio told Bassanio to borrow money in his name. It means Bassanio will borrow the money under Antonio's name. If due to any reason Bassanio failed to return the money, then Antonio would have to pay the money back and he will be responsible for the loss of the money. Bassanio agreed for this and both of them, that is Antonio and Bassanio, went to borrow money from Shylock. Shylock was a Jewish moneylender who had lots of money with him. But Shylock was not at all generous. He was a wicked man. He only cared for money. As Antonio would sometimes lend people money without charging any extra amount of interest on it, Shylock didn't like Antonio. When Antonio came to meet Shylock and asked him for money, Shylock decided to take a big advantage of this situation. Shylock put forth a strange condition in front of Antonio. Shylock would give them the money only if this strange condition was accepted. The condition was that if Antonio failed to return the money within a time period of 3 months, then Shylock would cut off 1 pound of Antonio's flesh. Shylock must get back his money within 3 months of time, and if he doesn't get the money back, then Antonio had to give Shylock 1 pound of his own flesh. Antonio wanted to help Bassanio by giving him the money. Thus, Antonio agreed to this condition and borrowed the money from Shylock. As soon as Antonio got the money, he gave it to Bassanio and told Bassanio to leave for Belmont as quickly as possible. Bassanio took the money and went to Belmont. When Bassanio saw the 3 caskets, he decided to choose the third one. Bassanio chose the casket made of lead, and that was the right casket. Thus, Bassanio had won Portia's hand by choosing the right casket. Portia too was very happy and glad to marry Bassanio. In the meanwhile, in Venice, there was a news that Antonio's ships were lost in the sea waves. When Shylock heard the news that Antonio had lost all his ships, he was very happy. Shylock became glad because he knew that now Antonio would not be able to pay back his money. As time passed, it was the time for the completion of the strange condition, and it was time to pay back Shylock's money. When Antonio was unable to pay back the money to Shylock, Shylock decided to take Antonio to the court. In the court, in front of the Duke, Shylock demanded that his condition should be fulfilled. The Duke of the court was a generous man and he liked Antonio. When he heard of the strange condition, he felt sorry for Antonio, but he couldn't do anything to save him. Even the Duke was unable to help Antonio because Antonio had written a legal bond or a agreement to Shylock in which he had stated that if he would not return the money back to Shylock within 3 months, then Shylock has the right to cut off 1 pound of Antonio's flesh. Shylock presented this written bond to the court in front of the Duke, and according to the law, Shylock was right, and thus he would ask Antonio for 1 pound of flesh. When Bassanio and Portia heard about all these things, they rushed back to Venice to help and save Antonio. Portia told Bassanio to pay back Shylock twice the amount he had borrowed. In this way, they decided to save Antonio by giving double the amount. But Shylock was very adamant. He did not agree to take the extra amount of money. He was very firm and stood strongly upon his demand of 1 pound of Antonio's flesh. All the people in the court, including the Duke, felt that this demand of Shylock to cut Antonio's flesh was inhuman. The Duke asked Shylock to show some mercy towards Antonio and not to cut his flesh. But Shylock was not ready to show any mercy. He was firm and asked only for Antonio's flesh. Shylock felt that Antonio and others had treated him badly before, and now it was his turn to take revenge from Antonio. He asked and demanded only for the flesh of Antonio. Shylock has made his demands very clear and was not ready to listen to anyone or to forgive Antonio. Students, what do you think? Can Portia and Bassanio save Antonio from the wrath of Shylock? Or will Shylock be successful in his cunning plan of getting Antonio's flesh? We will study about it in the next class. Till then, thank you.